Hey everybody, welcome back. Good to see you guys. Just getting things set up and getting ready for our class meeting at 11:10. So hopefully you guys are doing really good and staying healthy and safe. We got a couple more meetings on chapter 9, and then we'll get ready to start preparing for the final. But yeah, thank you guys for being here, and got about 8 minutes, and then we'll get started. Hey Veronica, how are you? Good to see you. Anybody else that's here, just feel free to say hi. Got some hot weather. Everybody trapped at home in this hot weather, so finally break it down and turn on the air conditioning unit. Couldn't hang, but it's not too bad. Over here in Long Beach, it's like mid 80s. I've definitely doubled worse, so it's not too bad. Okay. Just got the phone pulled up here. Kitty. Cat's over there walking around. Come on, kitty. Come on. Hello, Carmen. What's up? Good morning, guys. Good morning, everybody. Hi, Kevin. Hello. Just a few more minutes, and we'll get started at 11:10, as usual. What's up, kitty? What are you thinking? Just lost in thought. I never ever thought I would be teaching with this cat right here. It's kind of funny. Hi, Sebastian. Good to see you too. Yeah, she's just loves to be on the screen, I guess. She's definitely attention hungry. Just about another minute and we'll get rolling. Kid, I'm gonna have to ask you to move a little bit. Let's take you down here, huh, Kitty? Come on. Okay, almost class time, so hopefully you guys are all comfortable and ready to go. Cool. All right, well, just a couple seconds to spare until it's 11:10, but I guess I'll go ahead and let us get started for now. Welcome back, all of you guys here. Good to see you. Hi, Tuan. Today we just have another meeting on Chapter 9. Basically, we're now working through the last chapter of the book that we can study. So today and Tuesday, 2 more meetings going over that material. And then after that, it's review sessions and then the final exam. Also, as you guys know, we have 1 more homework that's due next Thursday. I sent everybody the instructions for that one, so if you haven't looked at them yet, or if you didn't get a chance to check out the last live stream, make sure to do that. You'll find in your inbox through Canvas that I sent you guys the directions and the detailed information about how to complete the last homework that's due next Thursday. So just don't forget that. You wouldn't want to get this far in the class and then just not turn something in at the end. So you have 1 more homework and then the final exam. Okay, any questions about anything? If so, at any time, now, later, or whenever, just let me know if you have anything, either about the lectures that we're going over, about the class in general, or just life. Doesn't really matter. So I'm always here to help and happy to interact with you guys. Hey, Bill. Okay, so let's just continue. Let me cover a little bit of ground that we went through last time, and then we'll pick up from there. So now we're on Chapter 9, which is all about ethics, a major branch of philosophy that goes back thousands and thousands of years. And what is ethics? Well, it is the study of morality. It's the theoretical study of morality and moral concepts. So what's morality? What's moral concepts? It's all about things like right and wrong, good and bad, moral versus immoral, just versus unjust, how a person should act versus how a person should not act. And so when you make judgments about, hey, Maddie, no worries with the typo. When you make judgments about what actions are right or wrong, or what policies are good or bad, or about what you yourself should or should not do, or about what other people should or should not do, then you engage in moral reasoning. So moral reasoning is just the intellectual process that leads you to your moral conclusions about what things are right and wrong, or what should or should not be done. I tried to fill you guys in about some of the major categories of action that are found within ethics. So we talked about the big three pretty much. So some actions are classified as morally impermissible, others are morally permissible, and then some are morally obligatory. So a morally impermissible action is just an action that's wrong, morally wrong, and it's not okay to do it. So you can imagine a whole bunch of possible actions that are like that: murder, theft, rape, torture, genocide, lying. Okay, and then there's morally permissible actions. That's the opposite. So what is a morally permissible act? Well, that's something that is not wrong, and it is okay to do. So that covers, I would hope, most everything that you actually do. Watching a live stream, eating your breakfast, I don't know, going to work, buying stuff, you know, giving, self-sacrificing, and in other cases they're just permitted and they're not wrong. But anyway, that's morally permissible. Now the third category is morally obligatory. Those are actions which you must do, and it would be wrong not to do them. So like, I don't know, the keeping of a promise would be a moral obligation. I don't know, payment of a bill once you've already received the service, I would think that's morally obligatory, not just optional, but required. And then, of course, the non-performance of all the impermissible actions would stand as a moral obligation. So like not killing, cheating, lying, or what to, was that distinction between law and ethics. Okay, like I want you guys to understand that there's some overlap, but they're not exactly the same. Because basically sometimes there can be things that are legal, but they're morally wrong. And there can be things that are illegal, but you know, they're not necessarily morally wrong. So let's see if you can think of anything that fits that bill. Is there any kind of practice or institution which did exist and was legal at some time, but reasonably we could argue it was immoral, even when it was legal? Can you think of anything that would, you know, be an example of something at one time legal, but nonetheless it's wrong, even when it was legal? Like what? What could be something like that? Legal, but immoral. Legal, but morally impermissible. Well, you're saying racism. That's fair. That's modern day. There's still racism, and it's definitely not okay, but I was thinking of something else, like a legal practice or institution. It's kind of not totally unconnected to that, though. But I was hoping maybe we get a few more things. Okay, so slavery, good. Or, you know, segregation, too. Slavery is an obvious example. Were human beings ever treated like property, and people sold away from their other family members as though they were just like robots to do labor for you or whatever? Yeah. But human beings are persons, and they have an inherent dignity. So that was not being recognized for some time in our country and in a lot of parts of the world. But that doesn't mean that when it was legal, it was good morally. It was immoral at the time. But you're not doing something unethical. That's righteous. That's a righteous civil disobedience of an unjust law. So morality and law don't always coincide. They can diverge because, of course, the legislators who institute laws are not gods. They're not infallible, perfect human agents, and therefore they can and have the possibility of instituting unjust laws and institutions themselves. So if you had given safe harbor to Jewish people in Nazi Germany, like at the Anne Frank house, that might have been considered a crime, but that's a heroic act. Today, court decision. I happen to believe there's nothing wrong with that, but some people, you know, they have a very different view. Some people are pro-life, and they say that is a horrifying, bad thing that we allowed this legally. So you can't just settle all the moral questions about whether some conduct is right or wrong by just looking up whether it's something that's legally permitted or not. Recreational drug use, smoking marijuana or whatever. A lot of people do that, even though it's considered by the federal government to be a crime. But if you do it and you're breaking that law, then I guess you don't really think that you're doing anything unethical or evil. So it's possible for there to be laws which prohibit conduct that's not immoral. It's also possible for laws to permit conduct which is immoral. So just understand that when you think about ethics, you need to think about the ethical standpoint, let's say, of the legislator who creates the laws, not just the citizen who is subject to them. If you were, let's say, a congressperson, and a bill came before you, and the bill was like, should we legalize marijuana or not, at the federal level? If you're that legislator, you can't just defer the judgment of whether that's right or wrong to some higher court of authority. Like, you can't just say, well, how should I vote? I got to vote with whatever the law is, because you're the lawmaker, okay? You're creating it yourself. So you would decide what should be the law based on your moral judgment, you see? So you should think about ethics in that kind of independent and original way. Like, you're the judge of the conduct, whether it's something that's legally prohibited or not. You're the one who's making ethical judgments about it, which in many cases can depart from the standards that have been established under the laws. Now, I'm not saying, on the other hand, that laws have no significance and they're just morally arbitrary, and that breaking them is like always a good thing. No, no, no. In fact, I would say most laws that we do have reflect the kind of shared general sense of right and wrong that we do have as a community, as a culture, as a society. But that doesn't mean that it's impossible for there to be exceptions to that. So for the most part, law and morality probably coincide. But when they don't, we have examples of legal conduct that's wrong or illegal conduct that's not wrong. And you have to think about it as a critical thinker, not just a person who says, they've told me what's right and wrong, and therefore I have no judgment to bring to the issue. Okay, so I just made a mention there of the distinction between law and morality. Morality is deeper than law. Morality is the source of judgment that you bring to the establishment of laws. So you don't judge whether something's right or wrong based on whether it's legal or illegal. You judge whether something should be legal or illegal based on whether you think that it's right or wrong for people to do it. Okay. So the next, I guess, things that we'll talk about here are different types of values that people have in discussions of ethics. So there's two main types of values. There's moral values, and then there's non-moral values. So let me put these concepts up here, and we'll go through that. Okay, so first off, moral values. What are those? Those are values that benefit you and other people, and they're considered good for their own sake. So values Okay, so it says they're values that benefit you and other people, and they're considered good for their own sake. So what are examples of these types of values? Well, there are things like compassion, justice, just in general, altruism. Okay, so values that benefit you and other people, and they're considered good for their own sake. Those are moral values. So some of the important aspects of the definition is that there's benefit, but it's not just to you, it's also to other people too, and they're considered good for their own sake. Now, take any of these examples here. I don't know, justice. You're trying to treat people fairly, not trying to marginalize, discriminate, or show bias against people, and just treat people equal, just to people. That's going to be a benefit to others, of course, because whoever you deal with that's going to be treated fairly, it benefits from the fair and equal treatment. But it's also a benefit to you, the individual, who does display that trait or that value, because you sleep well at night knowing that you're a fair person who doesn't double-cross people, cheat them, lie to them, exploit them, or manipulate them. So there's kind of a deep and abiding sense of personal contentment which comes from having moral values that guide your decision making. That's one example. Justice. I don't know. Forgiveness is also listed here. These are some terms mentioned in the book under that heading, so I just went with what they've given. But forgiveness, right? The ability to allow people who maybe have done bad things to you or that harmed you in some way, to allow them to return to a friendly, amicable relationship with you, to move on from your grievances, to relinquish them, and to return to friendly relationship with another person. If you forgive a person, of course, they benefit from the display of forgiveness because now they can continue to have a mutually supportive and beneficial relationship with you. So, of course, people would rather you be forgiving than that you cut them off. But you also, to be a forgiving person, benefit from that because what is the alternative? That you're just unforgiving and that you just hold grudges forever? If that's the case, then you have to live that way. And it just makes you kind of, I don't know, a little bit of an angry, mean-spirited person who's hostile or quick-tempered. So being forgiving is not just to benefit everybody else. Of course it benefits them, but it also derives a benefit to you. And then, of course, here's the other thing. It's good for its own sake. What that means is most of the time, right, when you show an attitude of justice, forgiveness, if you're altruistic, meaning you care about other people, not just yourself, when you display those values and those traits, usually it leads to a good outcome. The person who you forgave is nice to you again, and you guys continue and have a nice relationship that you might not have had if you weren't so forgiving. But it's not 100% of cases. Sometimes, even though you act in accordance with these values, the results won't be good. Has it ever happened in life that you forgive a person and they stab you in the back again and double-cross you again? It definitely has happened. It happens all the time. But the thing is, even when that occurs, right, when your display of forgiveness doesn't reach some kind of happy result, we don't look at the person and say, what a loser you are for being so forgiving. It was bad for you to even have that quality. You should have been unforgiving and just, cold. Normally we say that even when forgiveness doesn't reach the desired outcome, it was still a good thing just for its own sake that you were that type of person. So the point here is that usually it leads to a productive outcome. But even when it doesn't, we still think that it's better for you to be just and forgiving and altruistic than the contrary, even if it's not 100% of times where it works out in everybody's best interests. Okay, so that's what I would tell you guys here about these moral values. But we got to compare those against the different types. So they also mentioned in the book after this non-moral values. Okay, so let's go into that. Okay, so non-moral values, on the other hand, these are goal-oriented values, and they're only desired as a means to an end. Okay, and I'll give you some examples that were mentioned also in the book. Some examples of non-moral values are things like wealth, popularity, fame, prestige, nice, well-regarded reputation and all of that. So, non-moral values. These are more individualistic. They're not really based on benefit to other people. They're merely based on your individual pursuit of self-interest. So they're goal-oriented, and they're desired as a means to an end. An end is a goal. A means is a thing that you do to get to a goal. So like for you guys, maybe you have an ultimate goal of having a successful career, perhaps. And if you do, maybe getting your education completed is one of the means to that goal. So these non-moral values are just desired as instruments toward the the attainment of various objectives that you have. And the objective that's being kind of referred to is the objective of personal happiness. So it's like the pursuit of individual happiness is desired by means of these values here. So why do you want wealth, or to be, I don't know, popular or prestigious or famous? It is because it conduces to your self-interest, because you think that's going to make me happy. And of course, that's why I want to chase those goals. So these are more self-serving, more self-oriented. You don't want to be famous for other people, perhaps, or wealthy for the sake of others, although that could, of course, provide you a platform to be of benefit to other people. But if it did, and you cared about those other people, it would be because moral values inspired those choices. So non-moral values, it's not that they're bad or anything, and of course we all have to have those to get us up out of bed and to get us motivated to do whatever we're doing in life. Yes, they're important and they're valuable, but that shouldn't be everything. A healthy dose of the moral values mixed into your motivational structure of life is going to make you a happier and more well-rounded human being. So there's only so much happiness and contentment that can really be determined merely by being the wealthiest, most popular, most famous person. Are famous people ever sometimes depressed or even commit suicide? Sure, that can happen. And so happiness is a complex pursuit. It's not merely on the basis of, the material possessions that you have or your financial standing. Of course, that's important, and nobody wants to be worse off when it comes to any of that. But the kind of deeper sense of satisfaction with who you are as a human being and what you've done with your life can come from some sense of importance to the moral values too. So we're just saying try to include both. If you don't already, try to make sure that you have some sense of the importance of other people and the values that would lead to their benefit as well as your own. Okay, so consider which values motivate your everyday choices and even your consumer purchases and things. The non-moral values such as wealth can provide some happiness, but they don't provide ultimate contentment for a lot of people. It's also true that better critical thinkers are usually a little better at moral reasoning, so some of the tools you develop over the course of this semester and beyond will hopefully be useful for you as you make moral decisions throughout your whole life. Okay, so we've talked about these types of values. Next, I want to go into the discussion of the conscience. Okay, so here's the word. Conscience. So this is not the word consciousness, okay? It's the word conscience, and conscience is an innate source of knowledge about what's right and wrong. Okay, so innate means that it's something that we're naturally kind of born with. A normal, healthy, well-adjusted human being has some kind of basic conscience within them that tries to guide them towards the proper moral behavior and away from the wrong, immoral behavior. So it's something that we seem to have within us that's kind of just given to us by nature, and it's a unique concept, I think, for humans. Animals merely perceive their immediate perceived self-interest, and I don't think that they have the ability to have the kind of detailed regrets and guilty feelings that could arise from having harmed the interests of others. If it's like a dog, cat, or lion, tiger, bear, anything else out there in nature, it doesn't have the ability to place within the mind a moral principle that it has violated, and therefore to feel somehow, guilty because it did that. Humans, though, of course, we do. We have a conscience, and so, we have to face the burden of conscience, which is that sometimes when we do things that we shouldn't have done, we should listen to our conscience telling us that wasn't right and that we should do better. It's innate, but it's kind of like other things that are innate for human beings. The nature gives us this ability, but nurture can either support its development or allow it to become very weak. Like a little child that's born today, like say today's their first day, they're just born during the pandemic, but whatever. Today they can't talk, today they can't ride a bike, but maybe if we fast forward 10 years, they'll be talking and riding that same bike. Now, they had the ability as a human to do those things because a human being has this sort of cognition and intellect, which gives it the ability to master language, like we are talking right now with language. But if it's not given the proper environmental support from parents, community, teachers, in your early childhood development, then it will never develop in the right way. You know, there have actually been a couple of cases of like little children that were raised by wolves because somehow they just got abandoned in the woods. And you know, when they were discovered years later, somehow had survived. This is not a child with like a mental disability, but yet could not speak and couldn't really be taught to speak. Could never really fully master the concept of vocabulary and grammar because it wasn't supported at the earliest phase of childhood where you're supposed to acquire language. You know, and a child that's never like, I don't know, helped on a bike and like taught how to ride it and given training wheels and support from parents, they may never develop the ability that they do have innately. So it's sort of like that with conscience. You have it, but if you don't get the right kind of moral guidance and moral education in your young life, then it might sort of wither and become weak or die. But you don't want that to happen. Your conscience is important. It's trying to tell you important things about the nature of your conduct and what you should and should not be doing. So you should follow your conscience, try not to make it weak, allow it to speak to you, and try to do your best to lead a good moral example for everybody and for yourself. Now, the conscience has this emotional element that motivates us to act a certain way. It reveals to us moral sentiments. So let's talk about that next piece of terminology. What are moral sentiments? Okay, moral sentiments are just basically emotional states which alert us to moral situations and cause us to want to do what's right. So, okay, so our conscience, when it's active and when it's effective, it supplies us with these sentiments. And what they do is that when we're in a moral situation, a situation which can be judged as good or bad morally, these emotions kick in, we feel them, and they give us some non-neutral desire to do the right thing or to avoid doing the bad thing. There are different examples of these moral sentiments, so I'll give you a couple of them here. For example, one mentioned in the book is helper's high. So that's a positive. When you help other people and then feel good about yourself as a result. So there's actually some scientific evidence to indicate that when you do things that are good for other people, healthy human being, a chemical release of endorphins in the brain that actually makes you feel a sense of self-satisfaction. Now, it's called helper's high here. I don't know if I would particularly agree with the label because high makes it seem as if this is like the pursuit of some kind of like intoxicating effect from drugs, but it's a similar idea. The physiology and neurochemistry of your brain actually does give you kind of an inbuilt reward mechanism for being helpful to other people. that's why you get that kind of feeling of approbation and positive self-regard when you're a good human being that is nice to other people, that does things to the other people or for them, that help them out. So that actually conduces to a happy and satisfied life. You'll be relaxed, confident, self-assured, and having a clear conscience when you're helpful to people. When you don't seek to undermine or harm people, but the opposite. Be a benefit to people and make their lives better. So that's helper's high. There's also compassion. So that's just the awareness of other people's struggles and to care about those things. So both being aware of and caring about the difficulties that other people go through. Okay, so if you have no compassion, you might not even be aware of what other people go through, what difficulties they experience, or you might not care about it even if you were aware of it. So compassion has that two-part structure. Knowing about, being able to recognize the experiences of others, being able to kind of put yourself in their shoes, as they say, and taking an interest in it, taking like some care, that you care about not just one person, yourself, but other people too, and perhaps as much of humanity as possible. So that's another one of these moral sentiments, compassion. Now, if we go to the kind of negative moral sentiments, the ones that don't feel as good, there's definitely some of those too. There's moral outrage. Moral outrage. So that's just the common experience of whenever you're in a situation where you perceive that something is unjust, and then you become upset because of that. So yeah, when you perceive an injustice and then become upset. Okay, so, and if you observe such things, and then you feel upset about it, right? Outraged, as the word says, then you're experiencing moral outrage. So it's being angry, mad, upset on a moral basis because of something that is fundamentally, in your view, unjust, unethical, immoral, wrong. I don't know, if you turn on the news and you see cases of like, I don't know, there could be a case of like government overreach. Some people feel it morally outrageous when rules are imposed upon them by authority figures that they don't recognize. That could be a source of moral outrage. There's also, of course, moral outrage around abuses of the criminal justice system. You could say that, you know, a person was put up on charges that seemed fabricated and that the administration of justice failed, and you become outraged on that behalf. Maybe it could be a case of police brutality. Some of that, of course, is in the news right now. So a person having done nothing wrong, either killed by a law enforcement officer or in some other way where they did not deserve that treatment. So, I mean, there's so many issues in life, right, that we could pick and choose from. And when you see things that happen in the world that you don't think are right and you feel aggrieved, you feel upset, that's moral outrage. Moral outrage is one of the moral sentiments that's trying to like indicate to you what things you should feel passionately opposed to and try to correct or try and improve on. Now, there's another version of this, which is a little bit different. It's slightly, it's similar, but there's a subtle difference. So another one of these sentiments is resentment. Resentment is just kind of like a little more personal version of moral outrage. So resentment is just when you yourself are the victim of the injustice and then become upset. Okay, so like take the case, I don't know, of the Montgomery bus boycotts in the civil rights era, started by Rosa Parks. Probably all of you guys know that from basic lessons that you've learned in recent history, United States history. So you know the case. At that time in the United States, although slavery had been abolished, and there were still some segregated institutions, and there was this norm that existed where if you're a black passenger on the public bus and all the seats were filled and you're close to the front, if a white patron came on the bus, you're supposed to give up your seat and go to the back so that the white patron can sit up there closer to the front. Now, if you really think about it, it doesn't take much genius to recognize that that's fundamentally unjust. It's treating some people simply based on their skin color they're born with as second-class citizens in the country that they're citizens of. So it's establishing like a two-tiered society where some people are viewed as second-class citizens only due to the contingencies of their racial identity, which nobody, of course, can possibly control and which wouldn't be relevant either way in determining their intellectual or moral capacities. So if you're, let's say, just a citizen in the United States at that time and you saw that these boycotts were happening, suppose that you were like not a member of the black community, so you're like a white citizen, but you feel that that's unjust and you do feel the sense of moral outrage. That's one way of experiencing the situation. Now, if you were, let's say, a black citizen at that time who was harmed by this discrimination, then you'd feel resentment. So it's like moral outrage, but it's just you're the victim, not just other people for whom you have a sense of compassion, but you yourself. So sometimes other people are mistreated, and that's enough to trigger a feeling of outrage within you, maybe even wanting you to make some changes in society. Other times, you're one of the people who is the target of some kind of unjust treatment or institutional practice. So there's close cousins there, moral outrage and resentment. And I just have a couple more of these moral sentiments to list, and then we'll start talking about. And then there's shame. So guilt, what is that? So it's a bad feeling that results from having done a wrong action. So I'll say immoral just so that it's clear. Okay, so if you do something immoral and your conscience is strong and healthy, it's going to feel bad at some point. You'll reflect on your own conduct and you'll say, I feel guilty that I did that. I was caught up in the heat of the moment and I just did it, but I really should not have done that. That was bad. So that's the feeling of guilt that I'm sure any of us can or has experienced at least sometimes in life, right? Nobody's perfect for the most part. So guilt can, and it does happen. It's a bad feeling. It results from doing something that you think is immoral, and it makes you want to somehow try and rectify or make amends in the situation, if possible. Now, some people don't like the feeling. No one really likes the feeling of guilt. It's not a great feeling, but the thing is, you shouldn't try to just silence your feelings of guilt or ignore them. Because your conscience is telling you something important, that you could have done better and that you should do better next time. People who have no guilt at all, it's not someone that you should envy. A person who feels no guilt at all is like a psycho. It's like a psychopathic sociopath. It's a killer. It's a person that could harm people and feel nothing. And you don't want to be that way. As painful as it is to sometimes experience guilt and shame and all those things, you're better off for it because it's going to try and make sure that you make changes to your conduct and be a better person. You don't want to be the sort of person who's totally insensitive to your own bad conduct and who could care less who it hurts, as long as you're the one who comes out on top. So we should not try to just make people feel bad for giving us a guilt trip and everything. A lot of times those people are simply trying to help us understand where we could have made better decisions. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing to feel guilt, and we shouldn't just try and crowd it out of our consciousness. But one thing is sometimes people confuse guilt with shame, and so there's a difference. Let's mention shame. So shame it's a moral sentiment, but it's a, I don't know if I should call it a moral sentiment actually. It's an emotional state that can alert us to certain things about our conduct or about the environment that we're in. But it's different from guilt because this is a bad feeling that results from violating a social norm, okay? So guilt is the negative feeling, the bad feeling coming from something wrong that you did morally. But shame is just a bad feeling that comes from breaking a social norm or some type of taboo. And it's possible, therefore, to feel shame with no guilt if you feel kind of awkward or uncomfortable because you did something that was considered outside of a social norm, but you didn't really think that it was immoral what you did. You understand me? So there could be customs and cultural norms that you violate without trying to be a bad person. You know, so like, say you go to Europe or whatever, and you're an American in Europe and you're used to our American service culture where customer's always right. And if you just demand something like, hey, bring me another glass of water, you know, the waiter should just, oh yes, sir, sure, certainly, I'll be right there. The customer's not always right. You know, they may be wrong. In fact, they're subject to criticism if they're wrong. Now, if you're over there and you're like ordering a meal and you're like, hey, where's the ketchup, you know, and they kind of look at you like, who is this American being rude? You might feel a sense of shame, right? Just because over there, that's not normal to do that. And so everyone looking at you in the restaurant like, who is this loud, weird American being bossy? You might feel a little bit awkward, right? And a sense of shame, but you might not feel guilt because you could say, well, okay, I'm just kind of, in my culture, trained in a sense to act that way in this type of setting. So I don't think that I did something evil or wrong, but I know that I breached the etiquette and norms of the culture. So it's a little bit ashamed. I'm a little ashamed, but I'm not guilty. I don't know. They talked about in the book, you know, in previous generations where there was much more stigma around gay people in our society. At least, of course, there still is to some extent, but it's improved a lot. But imagine yourself a gay person with you know, the idea and the knowledge that you're just born like that and you didn't have a choice to make about it, and then people are kind of frowning on you for being outside of the predominant prevailing norm, which is like heteronormativity. You might say, well, I have a little sense of shame because I'm not like normal in this society like the vast majority of others, but since I didn't choose it, I don't feel like I'm guilty about it either. So we shouldn't confuse guilt with shame. Shame just comes from stepping outside the breach of a social convention. But guilt comes from actually thinking that you did do something wrong. I don't know, if you went to like an indigenous culture right now somewhere in the world, dressed like you are, in just Western clothing, people might be looking at you and laughing like, what is this weird clothes that this person wears? You know, out here we just have like, you know, you can imagine like clothes that the people here do, and I feel like I'm left out, and I feel like they're laughing at me, and I feel a little bit of shame. But you wouldn't feel guilt, right? Because there's nothing, let's say, unethical about the Western fashions of dress. They're just not considered normal everywhere. Okay, and vice versa, clearly. Okay then, so just a little point of information about guilt and shame. So next up, there's some talk in the book about the development of moral reasoning over the course of a person's life. And there's a famous psychologist, Harvard psychologist, Lawrence Kohlberg. He studied this question. How does a human being develop over the course of their lifetime in the moral sense. What are the processes or stages of moral development? And he thought that by studying cultures all over the world, he was able to identify a kind of universal pattern that he thought was kind of just built into the human condition. It's not something that you only see in some places and not others, but pretty well universally everywhere. So here's the guy's name, Lawrence Kohlberg. He was a Harvard psychology professor. He lived from 1927 till 1987. And he just, really focused in his research on the concept of moral development. He said there are 3 basic stages of moral development over your life. So we're going to talk about those. 3 stages of moral development. Now, a couple times in this class we've looked at, a 3-part breakdown of a process. Like they talked about the 3 stages of cognitive development, dualism, relativism, commitment. They talked about the 3 stages of the critical thinking process, experience, interpretation, analysis. So I'm not sure why it happens to be that a lot of academics and stuff like this 3 is the magic number phenomenon. But I don't know. In literature, you have books where the common structure is beginning, middle, end. So there's something about 3. Anyway, we're going to now learn about another 3-part procedure, or process rather, of moral development. How a person develops in stages or steps along their life when it comes to morality. Okay, so the first one is the most basic, obviously, and the most the earliest. It's called the preconventional stage. So the preconventional stage of moral development comes first, and this is kind of like the moral outlook of little children and very young people. Maybe some people never develop further. It's kind of sad, but we got to start somewhere. And so this is the earliest, most basic, least developed stage of your moral development. So what is it all about? At the preconventional stage, basically you just think of morality and the whole concept of right and wrong as avoiding punishment. So it's all just about your desire to not get in trouble, pretty much. So morality is all just about avoiding punishment. All just about avoiding punishment, nothing else. So think about how like little kids in their early life approach the concept of right and wrong, good and bad. They think what's bad and wrong is just what I get caught and get in trouble for. So if my teacher puts me on timeout, or my parent spanks me or grounds me, or I get yelled at or something, that's when I did something wrong. And my whole goal is just not get in trouble and not be punished. At that level of your moral development, though, you're thinking about morality in a pretty narrow and self-serving way. Why does this young person not want to, I don't know, steal? Not because they recognize that the theft is wrong or that it harms the person who has been stolen from, but just because they don't want to be receiving a penalty if they get caught doing it. So it's really a very self-serving moral perspective. You only care about doing the right thing in order to preserve your own self-interest. You don't really do the right things because they're right or because people establish these rules. You do it just because you're aware that there's a punishment mechanism that would be applied to you if you stepped outside the rules. Get caught doing, they wouldn't really care about whether it was right or wrong, or they wouldn't even think about it on a moral basis. So morality, right and wrong, only gets dealt with on a very surface level. Just, can I get in trouble for this? If so, okay, maybe I won't do it. And the whole reason is not because of any deeper thinking about the reason why it's right or wrong, just I don't like punishment. Okay, so that's the first stage, preconventional stage. They call it preconventional because you're not even thinking about any established conventions or norms. You're just thinking about yourself and being free from punishment. Now, there's a little visual diagram that the book offers to give you some additional understanding of this. So they draw two circles. One stands for me, and the other circle stands for everybody else, others. At the preconventional stage, the diagram shows that the circle of me is much bigger, and that's just to reflect for you, the reader, that it's all about me here at this first stage. I just focus on myself, and I don't want punishment. So at this point, you have this kind of visual to think about, me and then others over here. At the preconventional stage of moral development, you don't really care about others for their sake. You know, you might be fair to them. You might not do immoral things to them, but not for their sake, just because you don't want to be the one exposed to penalties if you did something that was judged to be wrong. Okay, so that's the first stage of moral development. And you see this when you look at the way little kids think about morality. But if you develop a little bit more and you graduate to the next level of your overall moral development process, then you get into stage 2. So we're going to go over stage 2 now. All right, so stage 2 is called the conventional stage. Now, the conventional stage of moral development, it's like a whole entire 180-degree turn from the first, because now you're completely concerned with everybody else's opinions and what they think. And so all you want to do at this stage is just fit in to the norms and customs. You just want to fit into them and not step outside of them so that people will look at you and judge you to be a nice boy or a good girl. So it's all about fitting in here, fitting into social norms and expectations. Why? Because they're normal. That's the convention. That's the conventional norm, hence the term conventional. So at this point, one wants to fit into the conventions or norms of their community so that they get judged as a good boy or nice girl. Okay, so what it says there is, one wants to fit into, in other words, to adhere to the norms, the moral norms of their society in order to be seen as either a good boy or a nice girl. So now your thinking is dominated by, how do I fit in? How do I fly under the radar? How do I be just one of the crowd? I don't want to be doing weird things that are considered abnormal, because then I'm not going to be considered normal. And I just want to fit into what's normal. So it's all about fitting in here to social norms and expectations. It's not so much prioritizing your desire to avoid punishment as much as it's prioritizing your desire to fit in. And so in this case, you actually take a supreme concern with others. And that means that the orientation of these two circles gets flipped. I'm not so much concerned with myself and my own attitudes and perspectives anymore. What I care about above all is the expectations that all others have of me, and therefore following along with them and fitting into them. If I do that, people are going to say nice boy or good girl, depending on the case. And that's all that this person desires at the second stage. So they moved on from thinking, all I care about is not getting caught and punished, to thinking, well, I actually do want to fit into the conventions of the world that I live in. But the third stage is the third and final. So if you even make complete moral progress to the highest level, then you'll get to this third stage. Okay, so let's talk about it. The third stage is deemed the post-conventional stage. Okay, so the post-conventional stage of moral development is the highest and most developed stage, and what it's all about is this. You believe that there are universal moral principles that you apply based on your own judgment. And these principles can sometimes differ from the conventions or norms of society. So you think of yourself as like a moral judge that has got a set of moral principles or a moral compass that you follow. And you believe that through following these universal moral principles, you'll do the right conduct, but sometimes your judgments will deviate from what the widespread view of society is. So now you have the ability to depart from social norms on the basis that you think you know what the right moral principles are. So one applies universal moral principles. One applies universal moral principles to conduct, and these principles can sometimes differ from the views of society. Okay, and now to demonstrate how there's now kind of an equilibrium between your own moral judgment and perspective and the input that you take from the outside external environment that you're in. So to show that they have achieved that kind of balance, the circles now are equal in size. The views of society and its members, their collected moral guidance and norms are taken seriously. But your own judgment and moral principles are weighing equally to those. So there's this kind of just dynamic exchange of information between the social norms and your own moral perspective. So if you were like just at the first stage of moral development and you live next to a person who's been a good neighbor and a great citizen, but you learned that they are a fugitive from justice, the question could be asked, should you turn them in? Now, maybe at the first stage of moral development, you'd say straightforwardly, yes, I should, because if I don't, what if I'm discovered as having been a person that didn't file the report knowing that they were a fugitive? Then maybe I would be in trouble. So I should just do that because that's what's right. Maybe at the second stage, you would say, well, I guess the social norm is to turn them in. And I probably wouldn't be punished if I did not do that, because who could really know? But at the same time, I want to do what's considered appropriate. So because that's the considered rule, turn in a fugitive, I'll do it. At the third stage, though, you'd try to really have a little bit more of a nuanced perspective. You'd start thinking about, like, well, what was the nature of the crime? Has the person been rehabilitated? Is there some greater benefit to having them serve their penalty versus them, I don't know, working on the outside as a free person to benefit people that way? So you'd have a little bit more complexity and the ability to make judgments that might disagree with the standard view of a society. So as you develop in your life morally, you make progress towards that third stage, meaning that sometimes you see the views broadcasted by society and you find yourself in disagreement with them. That doesn't mean that you always will, or that you'll just be like, you know, always against the grain or something weird like that. But that there's definitely going to be cases where a majority says one thing and you feel like the majority is wrong and there's an incorrect moral judgment that the masses have. So you want to maintain your own independent moral judgment and thinking. You want to have a compass morally that can lead you to the right behavior. And in many cases, you can't just take your guidance strictly from the norms established in society. That doesn't mean to reject them either, but it means to bring your own judgment to bear on it so that there's kind of that balance. Okay, so let me read a little bit from the book on this, and you can see some context from the textbook. Okay, so according to Harvard psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg, people advance through distinct stages in the development of their moral reasoning capabilities. These stages are transcultural, that is, they are found in every culture of the world. Each new stage represents increased proficiency in critical thinking skill and greater satisfaction with one's moral decisions. Kohlberg identified 3 levels of moral development, each with 2 distinct stages. Now, I want to make a mention here. In my presentation here right now, I'm just kind of simplifying it down to 3 stages. To be very technical, what he says himself is each of the 3 stages can be further divided into 2 subparts. So he talks about like stage 1, part A and B, stage 2, part A and B, and stage 3. But I thought that that was just going to make it unnecessarily complex for you. I think the essential point is clear enough if we just keep it at the summary statement that there's 3 stages. So 3. And it says here, in the first stage, preconventional stage, morality is defined egotistically in terms of oneself. People at this level expect others to treat them morally, but generally do not treat other people with moral respect unless doing so benefits them. Most, though not all people, outgrow the preconventional stage by high school. Most criminals are at this stage. You know, they're willing to commit the crimes as long as they think they won't get caught. Okay, so people at the conventional stage, on the other hand, look to others for moral guidance. Earning the approval of others and conforming to your peers are especially important to people at this stage. Most high school seniors and college freshmen are at this stage, the good boy, nice girl phenomenon in their moral development. This stage is associated with the first stage of cognitive development, in which students believe that there are right and wrong answers and that those in authority know the answers. This type of moral reasoning is sometimes known as cultural relativism. We'll talk about that. The majority of American adults are at this stage. Rather than thinking through decisions about the moral issues, they adopt the view that they think everyone agrees with. At the post-conventional stage of moral reasoning, people recognize that social conventions need to have justification. The fact that something is the law does not make it moral or just. Instead, moral decisions should be based on moral principles that are universal and on concerns such as justice, compassion, and respect. A person's stage of moral development is correlated with his or her behavior. Researchers found that only 9% of people in the first stage, but 38% of people at the second stage would offer help to someone who appeared to be suffering from the side effects of a drug. But all the subjects at the post-conventional stage offer their assistance. This is an empirical study. Less than 10% of American adults ever reach the post-conventional level of moral reasoning. People at lower levels of moral reasoning tend to come up with simple-minded solutions, and when those solutions do not work, they become baffled. People outgrow their old way of thinking when it becomes inadequate for resolving the more complex problems and issues they encounter in life. Movement to a higher stage is usually triggered by new ideas or experiences that conflict with their old worldview. Okay, so hopefully that little addition of text helps to bring this into greater detail for you guys. Now, for the next meeting, which is Tuesday, we have one more big important component of this chapter 9 to go over, and that's what are different moral theories. Okay, so like I've said to you guys, I kind of want to balance the time of each of these 3 lectures on chapter 9 so that we don't do it all too early. So we'll end a little earlier today, but let me just preview for you the upcoming concepts that'll be mentioned on Tuesday. We're going to talk a little bit about different types of moral theories. So some people believe in what's called moral relativism, which means that morality is not objective or universal, and it just depends on either the individual or the society. That's moral relativism. We'll talk about that. There's also, though, moral universalism, which says that morality is objective, that it's not something that just depends and that it varies by person to person or place to place. Moral universalism says there's an objective moral code. It never changes, and it's the same for all people, places, and times. And so we'll learn a little bit about some moral relativist theories and some moral universalist theories. And that would close all of our notes for the class. After that, we just start reviewing for the final that's coming up. So, I don't know, any questions, comments, anything from you guys that I could add for today? Let me know if so. And if not, then we'll just break and adjourn a little earlier, and you guys will be on to your weekend. Good weekend, I hope. Sounds good to you guys? Are we all clear? We have one more meeting on Chapter 9. That's Tuesday. Your homework for the final homework is next Thursday, and then there's the final on Thursday the 21st, the week after that. So let me know. No questions, guys? You're all good? Seems to be. So I guess in that case, have a good day then. Have a great one. Make sure you read this Chapter 9 material. Some of those questions on Chapter 9 I will include in the final. And that's about it. All right, guys. Take care then. Have a good weekend, and I will see you back on Tuesday at the next live stream. Stay healthy, and I'll see you then.